girl, there is so much astrology lingo, and when I was just getting into it, I was so confused all the time. Like, what the fuck is a ruled by? Like, what do you mean by lunation? Like, I needed to be clearer. What's up, y'all? My name is Destiny Janae, aka your favorite astrology weather woman, and welcome to my Vortex, aka channel. This video is actually brought to you by me, literally my own products. 2023 astrology planner and the astrology observation journal. All of these have astrology weather. 2023 astrology planner literally teaches you every single thing you need to know about astrology, and it's also a planner that literally shows you the astrology weather of every single day whenever planets make ingresses, where there's new moons, full moons, the exact time that they happen, also when the moon changes signs. At the very bottom there's this really cool legend that helps you decode all of the symbols if you still struggle learning what the symbols mean. And the astrology crash course that's featured within the 2023 astrology planner teaches you everything about the signs, the houses, the aspects, planets, and what happens when you have a transit with one of them. That's my 2023 astrology planner. My astrology observation journal is going to help you unlock what your birth chart looks like in real time. Because the only reason we even know anything about astrology in the first place is because we first observed it and then discovered that astrology itself is a reoccurring phenomenon. Each page contains the astrology weather, the daily aspects, the moon sign, phase, and the time that it changes, as well as planetary ingresses, new moons, and full moons. Astrology observation journal actually has a daily ephemeris for noon. And so with all this daily astrology weather being wrapped up in a neat little bow for you, you can just write down what happened for you and your life. You'll start seeing your birth chart unfold within these pages. It's also a monthly page that shows you every single major astrological movement, as well as a chart of how far each planet goes in each sign. Label each house, so you always know how the astrology weather is activating your own birth chart. The 2023 astrology planner and the astrology observation journal are two sides of the same coin. As you can see, they literally have opposite artwork, which I did on purpose. Both of these are available on Amazon and eligible for Prime shipping. Now let's get into the point of this video, because girl, there is so much astrology lingo, and when I was just getting into it, I was so confused all the time. Like, what the fuck is a ruled by? Like, what do you mean by lunation? Like, I needed to be clearer, so here it is for you. So we're gonna work from the bottom up, from the more simple topics to the more advanced type of things. To start off, your birth chart. Your birth chart is basically a screenshot of the sky at the very second that you were born. And your birth chart is basically a map of your life. It represents not only your psychological traits, but it also represents very physical things that happen to you, like you getting a new job or your romantic pattern, whether you have boundaries or not. Your birth chart can give me a lot of information. But the thing about your chart is that it's not activated all at once. And we'll get into that later. Most people know what the planets are, but I'm gonna make it very clear for you. So the planets are celestial bodies that have a symbolic meaning in your birth chart. So for example, the sun is you. Venus represents what you love, who you love, the things you enjoy doing, and everything to do with pleasure. The moon represents your emotions, your relationship to your mom, who you are when no one's looking. And so the planets all have their own type of energy that they bring to each sign. And most people know what their zodiac sign is, but what even is a zodiac sign? For this, you'll want to hold on to the idea that astrology is all symbolic. So the signs to me are kind of like locations, right? When you have a planet in a certain location, it's going to behave differently. So these locations are sometimes fun and upbeat and fiery and a little aggressive, like the sign Aries. Or some of the locations or signs can be really emotional and sensitive, and it's a landscape of water that you can get lost in, like the sign of Pisces. So depending on where the planet is in the zodiac determines how the planet acts. And that brings me into the idea of dignity, where some planets function really well in some signs, but they function really badly in others. So for example, Mars is the planet of action, aggression, confidence, your sex life, career. It's a very masculine oriented planet, and so it does really well in its home sign of Aries. So a planet's home sign is where they function the absolute best. Any negative qualities are diminished and all of the positive qualities are accentuated. So when Mars is in Aries, it's free to express itself. It's self-motivated, it's daring and brave and just excited. Because every single sign comes in pairs, when that same planet is in the opposite sign of its home sign, it does doesn't function quite as well, and this is called its detriment. So when Mars is in Libra, it's a little bit like using crutches, because the sign of Libra can often be very passive. It wants peace all around it in its environment. And so Libra energy will sometimes hold back its own feelings so as not to step any toes. And the thing is that Mars loves to step on toes. So when Mars is in Libra, it has a tendency to be a lot more passive aggressive. So basically when a sign is at its best, it's in its home sign, and when a sign is at its quote unquote worst, it's in its detriment. But the home sign is not the only place that a planet does well, and the detriment sign is not the only place that a planet does badly. And so when a planet isn't quite at home, but it's kind of like staying in a luxury hotel, it's called exalted. A planet functions very, very well there. Not quite as well as being in its home sign, but it still loves being there. For example, Venus, the planet of love and money and pleasure, is exalted in the sign of Pisces. This is a very emotional, daydreamy, and sensitive type of sign. You know, the energies, they vibe. But Venus is in its fall in the sign of Virgo. Virgo energy strives toward perfection. It is ruled by Mercury, meaning it operates a lot more on logic than it does on the heart. Venus's energy isn't logical at all, because it's love. There is really no logic to love. And that's even why people who have a Venus in its fall or detriment tend to have certain obstacles in life before they have that normal, stereotypical experience. So for example, someone who has a Venus in Virgo, Venus is in its fall in Virgo, right? They often struggle with the head versus heart. They know what their feelings are, but they just can't act in a very logical way. And Virgo energy also has a tendency to just give and give and give. They want to fix the lives of themselves and others. And the experience of a lot of Virgo Venus people is that they deal with people who took advantage of their kindness, who took advantage of what they had to give, which is why they automatically default to that logical brain, because at some point in their life they learned not to trust that heartfelt feeling. This isn't the experience of every single Virgo Venus, right? But it is an example of how the exaltation and fall versus home sign versus detriment concept kind of pulls your birth chart together, weaves a bigger story than just, oh, Venus is in Virgo. So the houses. Basically, as I said earlier, your birth chart is a screenshot of the sky at the very second that you were born, right? So that circular screenshot is then cut into 12 pieces like a pizza. These 12 pieces are otherwise known as houses. Now, the houses in astrology represent certain areas of your life. Some of the houses are more important or sensitive to stimulation than other houses. Here's what I mean. So the first house of self, fourth house of home and family, seventh house of relationships, marriage, and committed partnerships, and 10th house of career, reputation, and public image are all known as the angled houses. And these are the most critical areas in your birth chart. And they are highly sensitive to planets occupying these houses. So if you have your sun in the 7th house, that's a really big deal. They're also very sensitive to current astrology weather. So that's when the planets that still are moving every single day in the sky are activating those houses in your birth chart. So that actually brings me to our next topic, which is transits. So basically, as I said earlier, your birth chart is a screenshot of the sky at the very second that you were born, right? But the thing is that that's just a screenshot that represents you. But the planets kept moving after you were born. Some planets move really fast, like the moon, which changes its sign every 2 or 3 days. Some planets take a really long time to move out of a sign, like Pluto, which takes up to 30 years to move out of a sign. You'll notice over time, if you're into astrology, that as the planets move through the sky, they're also activating different areas of your birth chart. So let's say your moon sign is in Libra, and then every time Libra season approaches, which is when the sun is in Libra, usually around September, October, you are just living the life. You're vibing, you're connecting with people, you're making very close friends. Life just feels really good because the current sun is very close to your actual moon sign. Remember how earlier I said that your birth chart isn't activated all at once? This is one of the many instances in which your birth chart is going to be activated. Now, another thing about the planets is that they like to talk to each other. And this is how we get aspects. So the way that we determine aspects is how far apart are the planets. When the planets are 90 degrees apart from each other, this is called a square aspect. Literally as in, they finna square up. Planets are 120 degrees apart from each other, about that far. That's called a trine aspect, which is very supportive. And it also means that the planets are in the same element, which we'll talk about in just a second. When planets are 60 degrees apart from each other, that's called a sextile. It's also a very positive and supportive aspect. They're kind of batting eyes at each other and winking a little bit. And when planets are 180 degrees apart from each other, directly opposite each other, that's called an opposition. So when planets are very close to each other, within 10 degrees of each other, that means their energy is linked together permanently. So you can't talk about one planet without talking about the energy of the other planet. Now, I actually get this question a lot on my TikTok, and it's basically the use of the word placement. So sometimes I'll say, this is going to be a very positive time for Aries placement. Well, what does a placement mean? It basically means that you have a planet, more specifically a very personal planet, like your sun, moon, rising, Venus, or Mars in that sign. When I say, oh, this is going to be a very good time for Aries placements, and you have an Aries Venus, you know that it's going to be a good time for you romantically or dealing with money, because that's what Venus represents. I also wanted to talk about the modalities, otherwise known as the quadruplicities. This is basically just a way to group signs together. So there's 3 different types of modalities, right? There's cardinal, there's fixed, and there's mutable. So let's start off with cardinal, right? The cardinal signs are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, in that order. The cardinal signs are known for starting something up, because when the sun is in one of these cardinal signs, that means that a new season is about to happen. So Aries starts off the whole zodiac period, and it starts off the spring. And so then we move into Cancer, which starts off the season of the summer. Then Libra starts off the season of the fall. And Capricorn starts off the season of winter. Cardinal signs are known for their creativity, their ideas, but one of the negative sides of the cardinal signs is that they don't always follow through on those ideas. So now you know, if you have Cancer, Aries, Libra, or Capricorn in your birth chart, you know that that is a weakness of yours. So now you know, okay, now I need to put extra work to follow through on things. Which leads me to our next quadruplicity or modality, which is the fixed signs. And these are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Now the fixed signs are right in the middle of a season, right? This is where Taurus continues the spring, Leo continues the summer, Scorpio continues the fall, and Aquarius continues the winter time. The thing about the fixed signs is that they have very good staying power. They like things how they like them, and it's their way or the motherfucking highway. The negative side of the fixed signs is that they sometimes follow through and have too much staying power. So sometimes they'll keep doing shit even when they don't like doing it, or even if they don't have passion for it anymore. So next, we move into our last modality or quadruplicity, which is the mutable signs. And these are the signs that conclude or finish off the season that they're in. And these signs are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. The thing about mutable signs is that the weather, when the sun is in a mutable sign, the weather is very ambiguous. And that's because in traditional astrology, they refer to the mutable signs as double body. Kind of like they have 2 sides to that sign. So the mutable signs are very good at adapting, not only to the environment around them, but adapting to very shitty situations. So Gemini is at the very end of spring, but it's adapting to summer weather. Virgo energy is at the very end of summer, but it's adapting and transitioning into fall weather. Sagittarius is at the very tail end of fall, and it's adapting to winter weather. And Pisces energy is at the very end of winter, but it's adapting and transitioning into spring weather. The negative side of the mutable signs, though, is because they're so good at adapting and changing up things about themselves, is that they can sometimes be a little bit flaky, flake out on plans, and they may struggle with boundaries. They may forget where they end and someone else begins. I think it's really important for the mutable signs to spend time alone and really work on their self-concept throughout their life. Mutable signs have a tendency to become whoever is in their environment. It can be a really good thing at times if you're surrounded by people who want the best for you and people who are a positive influence on you, or it can be a really bad thing if you're surrounded by people who don't have your best intentions and they are a really bad influence. So that's the modalities: cardinal, fixed, and mutable. Another way that we can group the signs up is by element, and there are actually 4 elements for each element on Earth. There's fire, earth, air, and water, in that order in the zodiac. So we begin with the fire signs, right? The fire signs are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. The fire signs are all about passion. They're all about creativity. They literally get fired up. They brighten up the rooms that they enter in. But the negative side of them is that they also are quicker to anger. They can be very feisty, and they can be selfish or self-centered at times. The next element is the earth element, and this is comprised of Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Earth signs are all about the physical things that you can touch, as well as your morals and the backbone of who you are. The earth signs are associated with money, material possession, working, your career, your productivity levels, and those types of things. But the negative side of the earth signs is that they can sometimes be represented as greedy, materialistic, also selfish. And they're represented by the earth because they're known for being pretty stable people. The next element or group of signs are the air signs. So the air signs are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, in that order. Air signs are all about communication, ideas, society, and they're all about groups of people that come together. The negative side of the air signs is that they also can be a bit flaky because air, you know, there's really no way to just contain air, right? I mean, unless you have a very expensive machine or something like that. But air just kind of goes about freely and it kind of does what it wants. And another negative side of the air signs is that they can be seen as manipulative. So the last grouping of the elements are the water signs. These are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And the water signs are known for being very emotional people. It doesn't guarantee that you'll be in touch with your emotions, but it does mean that you have quite a bit of them, and they're very rich, and they color your perspective of life. Water signs also do struggle with their boundaries because water is going to take the shape of whatever container you place it in. Their negative side is that they can also be over emotional, manipulative, easy to anger, and kind of suffer from mood swings. So those are the elements: fire, earth, air, and water. Another thing that's pretty important in astrology is called a lunation. And this is just a fancy word for either a new moon or a full moon. Full moons are basically when the moon is at its brightest, right? The sun is directly opposite of the moon. The sun is shining all of its light onto the moon, and the moon is very visible in the sky. Full moons represent some sort of release or culmination, or just bring some sort of news or information. The other side of lunations are the new moons, which is when the sun and the moon are sticking together and you cannot see the moon in the sky. And this is breeding ground for amazing ideas and just the start of something new in the house that new moon is happening in your own birth chart. So a pretty intense lunation would be an eclipse. And it's kind of like a new or full moon on steroids, because the eclipses are new or full moons that happen very close to the north or south node. The north and south nodes deal with fate. The north node is kind of pushing you towards your destiny. It's kind of increasing in energy, and it kind of deals with obsession, just where you're supposed to be at this point in time. And the north node deals with your past, either in this lifetime or your past in previous lifetimes if you believe in reincarnation. But the south node also deals with things that are decreasing in energy or the attention that you're giving it. But one thing that stays true through both of the north and south nodes is that they represent very fated events, and they're also very uncontrollable energy, which is why when eclipses happen, it can feel like a very pressured or high stakes type of situation, because eclipses bring radical life changes that put you on track with your destiny or fate. And every single year we have 2 eclipse seasons, because as I mentioned earlier, every single sign has an opposite sign. The signs come in pairs the same way that the houses come in pairs. So how do we know when eclipse season begins, right? So when the sun gets within 19 degrees of the north or south node. So basically what I'm saying, 19 days before the eclipse and 19 days after the eclipse. You can even say 20 days because it makes a lot more sense and it's easier to remember. So 20 days before the actual eclipse and 20 days after the eclipse represents the whole of eclipse season. In every eclipse season, there are usually 2 eclipses: a lunar eclipse, which is a full moon, and a solar eclipse, which is a new moon. So every eclipse is different depending on which node it's near. So an eclipse that's very close to the north node is going to represent some sort of dramatic beginning, and an eclipse that's very close to the south node represents a very dramatic ending. So now let's talk about synastry. right? Which is basically how two birth charts interact with each other, otherwise known as relationship astrology. So remember how earlier I was talking about how transits are basically when the astrology weather in the sky is activating different areas in your birth chart, and that's going to affect what you see in your life on the daily. So synastry is like a permanent transit because that person's astrology weather or birth chart is also influencing your astrology weather or birth chart, and they're interacting with each other. And so this is why different partners will experience a different version of you, because they're activating different areas of your chart and pulling out different traits and bringing different areas of you and your own personality to the front of your face. For example, dating someone who has their Saturn sign very close to your Venus. So Venus represents love and pleasure, and it's your love language, and it's everything that brings you pleasure. But Saturn is a very serious sign, and sometimes it will restrict things and it'll bring hard lessons. So me personally, dating someone who has the same Saturn as your Venus can be a very make or break moment, and it's going to break a lot of people who aren't at that exact moment of maturity. Usually with a Venus-Saturn type of aspect, there's always going to be one partner who's a lot more mature than the other, or if it's the right time in your life and both of you are mature, it can represent a relationship that lasts a very long time. But if it's not that right situation, it can feel very smothering for one or both partners. Now let's talk about another concept, which is the benefics and malefics. And basically this is a way of grouping up planets. And so the benefics, which are the quote-unquote good planets, are Venus and Jupiter. And Venus is all about love and pleasure and money and all of those really good things in life, and Jupiter wants to spoil you. Those are the benefics. So anytime there's an aspect in the astrology weather or even in your own birth chart that involves a benefic, it means that some really amazing results might happen. On the other hand, there are the malefics, which are Mars and Saturn. Mars is all about aggression, confidence, but you know, Mars is known for stepping on people's toes and irritating things. Saturn is the planet of time, karma, hard lessons, growing up, tough love, if anything. Anytime there's an aspect dealing with the malefics, it might represent a harder time in your life. Now, I don't like to look at it in a very black and white way of, oh, this is good, this is bad. But honestly, I just think that's the circle of life, and that these harder things are meant to balance the good things. Honestly, I think this is more of a philosophical thing than anything else, which is like, what is the point of the good if the bad doesn't exist? Like, would you know the difference? If the bad didn't exist, everything would just be what it is. You wouldn't be able to appreciate the good without the bad, if that makes sense. The benefics are nothing without the malefics. The malefics are nothing without the benefics. Now this actually brings me to another concept, which is a way to categorize birth charts as either a day chart or a night chart, and this is called sect. So if you're born in the daytime, the most positive planet in your birth chart is going to be Jupiter. The most negative planet that you'll struggle with the most is Mars. Now what happens to the other benefic and malefic, right? So Venus isn't quite as positive as Jupiter, and Saturn isn't quite as negative as Mars. They're a little bit more neutral. So for example, if you're born in the daytime and you have Mars very close to something like your moon, it can spell, you know, as negative as it gets, which is both reassuring and a little scary at times. But I don't really think you should be scared of astrology. I think astrology is there to use as a tool to not only help you cope whenever like shit goes awry in your life, but also so that you can plan things to be as successful as possible. Anyway, the other type of chart is the night chart, in which Venus is the most positive planet in your birth chart and Saturn is the most negative planet in your birth chart, where Jupiter isn't quite as positive as Venus and Mars isn't quite as negative as Saturn for you. So a lot of people who are born at nighttime tend to have a harder experience with their Saturn return, or these really harsh Saturn aspects, like Saturn squaring their sun, because they're born with a night chart. So you might be saying, hold up, wait, what the fuck is a Saturn return, Destiny? And so a return is basically when a planet in the sky in the current astrology weather returns to the very same spot that it was when you were born. Now, every single return has a different flavor depending on the planet. So whenever you have a Venus return, Venus being all about love and money and relationships and beauty, the things that you enjoy, it's kind of like a refresh to those things. You might have a glow up. You might discover a new beauty routine that just takes you to the whole next level. You might meet a new partner, those types of things. Now, the Saturn return happens around age 28 through 30. And this is where Saturn topics are a lot more prevalent in your life. And it's kind of like that final push into adulthood, where you're really learning some hard lessons and you're really stabilizing yourself and who you are. A lot of people get established in their career when their Saturn return happens, or they have children, they start a family. There are so many different ways that the Saturn return can happen in your chart. Another thing that happens pretty often is when planets go retrograde. So it's not that the planet in the actual solar system is moving backwards, but it appears to be moving backward from our perspective on Earth. And like I said earlier, you'll have to keep in mind with the fact that astrology is majorly symbolic. It doesn't actually matter whether the planet is physically moving backward or not. But if it appears to be moving backward from our perspective on Earth, that has a huge symbolic meaning. And so whenever planets move backward or retrograde, they're kind of reevaluating themselves. They're not as confident, they don't operate quite as well. And if you ask me, I don't think retrogrades are annoying. I think they're very necessary to get from one place to another. I think in order to grow, it's necessary for you to recoup, reevaluate, take a rest for a second, just drop the mic and really reevaluate, okay, why do we do the things that we do? What are our true motivations? What matters? What doesn't matter? And so Mercury retrogrades happen the most often. We usually get about 3 Mercury retrogrades in 1 year. Sometimes 4, but I think it's usually 3. And Mercury retrogrades are where you're reevaluating your actual mindset. And so Mercury deals with communication, learning, academia, your mindset, the way you speak. And that's why miscommunication during Mercury retrogrades is very prevalent. And it's why a lot of people dislike Mercury retrogrades, because it can also cause like technological fuck-ups. Like it can mess up your car, your computer, your Wi-Fi, those little trivial things throughout the day. But the thing is, we always know when Mercury retrogrades are coming. Like you can say, okay, well, a Mercury retrograde is coming soon. Let me make sure that my car has everything that it needs so that it doesn't take longer than it normally needs to during the retrograde, because retrogrades can also prolong the process of things that you've been working on. For example, we just came out of a Mars retrograde in Gemini, and Mars retrograde is where we're reevaluating what motivates us. Who are our enemies? Because Mars does deal with conflict. What makes us angry? What makes us confident? Mars also deals with the sex drive, so it's also reevaluating that area of your life as well. Basically, the whole point of a retrograde is that the energy of that planet is turned inward, and it's questioning itself a lot more than usual. If you're born with a retrograde planet in your own birth chart, it also means a similar thing. You actually might thrive during retrogrades a bit better than usual. And having a retrograde planet is also very similar to having a planet in its detriment or fall. And it just means that there's a couple obstacles in life that you'll need to go through before you have that quote-unquote normal experience, or the experience that you want. Now let's move into the topic of annual profections. So remember how I said earlier that your birth chart is not activated all at once. So transits are a way that your birth chart is being activated, and another way it's being activated is through annual profections. So basically, from one birthday to the next birthday, one topic, one house in your birth chart is a lot more in your face than any other area. And any planets that you have in that house are a lot more activated. You'll see them more in your everyday life. So for example, my birthday is April 29th. So for this year of 2023, from April 29th of 2023 until April 29th of 2024, I'll be in a 12th house profection year. So 12th house topics of spirituality, mental health, loss, your faith, and even magic will be in my face a lot more. And I don't have any planets in the 12th house, but I do have my North Node there, which is my life purpose. And every 23-year-old out there is in a 12th house profection year. So from that year that I'm 23, I'll see my life purpose unfolding. Another concept that deals with how your birth chart isn't activated all at once is secondary progressions. And this one's a little confusing to explain, but it basically is a symbolic chart, and the planets in that chart move very, very, very slowly. So when one planet actually does move either into a new sign or house, it's a really big deal, and you'll see that in your own life. So for example, me, in my secondary progressions chart, I had a full moon, which only happens, I think, every 15 years in secondary progressions. Like I said, it takes a very long time for that chart to move around, so it's a big deal when you do have something. During that full moon, I had a lot of crazy shit happen in my life, and it's crazy how accurate the timing was on that too. So the next concept that actually activates your birth chart separately is called zodiacal releasing. Now this is one of those things that it is very specific to your chart, and you have to have the right birth time or else it won't be accurate. But basically, zodiacal releasing can tell you when one chapter in your life is opening and another one is closing. Sometimes several chapters open at once, but zodiacal releasing will give you more of the overarching story of a specific time in your life. So another thing that tends to confuse people is the house system. So the house systems just represent how you're looking at the chart. It's kind of like a different lens to put on the chart. So for example, most people are comfortable with the Placidus house system because most astrology websites have Placidus as their default system. For Placidus, all the houses are different sizes. More than one sign can be in one house in Placidus. I personally prefer whole sign houses because it's a lot more clean cut to analyze. And also for a lot of the techniques that I was talking about earlier, like annual perfection and zodiacal releasing, you need to use the whole sign system. And I'm a lot more of a traditional astrologer where I use the whole sign system. And also if you're reading a horoscope, you're reading it for a whole sign chart because Placidus, the house sizes and signs are different for everybody. And so in my opinion, tracking transits and activations to your birth chart is a bit trickier using Placidus. But I'll be so honest, I use both of them. I just prefer whole sign. But if you ask me, I think they both tell you the same thing but in different ways. And so another way that you can change the lens on your birth chart is by the zodiacal system. So this is either using tropical or sidereal. So tropical is the one that most people in the Western world predominantly use in their practice, and it's based on the season. So Aries season is in spring. Capricorn season is in winter. The sidereal system is based on the actual constellations of the zodiac and where they are now. Because the thing is that the stars, they shift over time, gradually over thousands of years. And so the sidereal zodiac system follows that as the signs shift. If you ask me personally, once again, I think both of these lenses, tropical and sidereal, tell you the same thing but in different ways. But honestly, I think it's fun to explore throughout astrology. Astrology is meant to be fun, in my opinion, and I just think it's all about your perspective. Personally, I use the tropical system, but the sidereal system is just as valid. It's just a different way of looking at things. And so last but not least is the ephemeris. Especially if you're very new to astrology, or even if you've been involved in astrology before and you've just never heard this word before. The ephemeris basically shows you where every single sign is, the degree that it's at, and whether it's retrograde or not. You can find a copy of an ephemeris online, or you can use the one in my astrology observation journal, or the weekly one in my 2023 astrology planner. The thing about an ephemeris is that before computers were accessible to everyone, an ephemeris was necessary to show you where each planet was, whether it was retrograde or not, and honestly how fast or slow it was moving.